I was with ABAG first, and I eventually became president of ABAG, and I was during their 25th anniversary celebration, so we could probably figure that one out. And then I later became a member of MTC, and I eventually became chair of MTC. And I do remember those years because it was my last 2 years on MTC, and that was 1995 to 1997. Actually, I believe I represented the Association of Bay Area Governments on MTC. So even there were 2 of us from Santa Clara County, but actually I represented the Association of Bay Area Governments. I was first a city council member and mayor of Sunnyvale when I was with ABAG, and then I stayed on ABAG and I was a supervisor there. I moved to the Board of Supervisors, and then when I became a member of the Board of Supervisors, I served then on MTC. Well, I think it's first important to talk about what does regionalism mean. And for me, it's a belief that all communities benefit when there's shared responsibility and shared power in decision-making on land use and transportation. So if that's your definition of regionalism, then I think that that's what, you look at ABAG that's looking at, a regional effort to bring communities together to deal with land use issues, and you have MTC bringing communities together to deal with transportation issues. So I think that, that's really the focus of the 2 agencies, and I think in many ways they've been successful.
So do you think that having more of a broader based approach to what they do is more advantageous than a very localized approach?
Well, you have to have that because, so many issues cross cities and counties' jurisdictions. And if you don't have that regional agency that can bring everybody together to talk about those issues that cross those jurisdictions, then you're always going to have, conflict among them. So I see it as a real, the agencies really provide that coordination, cooperation, and in some ways actually power sharing. Well, I think I've always viewed myself as the person who attempted to bring people together to solve problems. And on both agencies, I worked toward that effort. On the ABAG side, I worked on the housing effort, looking at, we talked about regional fair share of housing and trying to convince communities in a way that, in their own enlightened self-interest for the health of the economy and everything else in the Bay Area, that it really was important to look at, providing that housing here. And then on the MTC side of the equation, I looked at bringing communities together for, projects of, different types of transportation projects. I'm thinking of 2 in particular. One was the JPB that was established to save the Caltrain service. When the state got out of the business, the 3 counties came together, San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara. And that really was a concerted effort by those 3 counties and those leaders in those counties to maintain that service and keep it going. And then when I became chair of MTC, we had recently, what had come into legislation was the congestion management agencies. And Santa Clara County was one of the first congestion management agencies around. And so with the growth of those, I really strove to see if we couldn't have more coordination with congestion management agencies and MTC. Well, MTC was more part of a funder and helping us fund it, but actually MTC brought the 3 counties together when it came to the funding issue, because there was no question that the 3 counties wanted to protect that service. But what happened was, how are we going to fund it? And I think if you look, I don't know if it still exists, but in those days we were trying to figure out how to put it into the regional plan for transportation. And if you looked at it then, when I was there, it had a funny little symbol that kind of looked like that, where it had an asterisk about how those 3 counties would then fund it. And it was the first time I've ever seen a regional plan that kind of little symbol that says, take a look down below, because you know, it's taken a lot of work and a lot of effort to come up with this funding mechanism.
Now, especially more recently, ABAG and MTC have started to work very closely together on a number of things. In your mind, are there accomplishments in the Bay Area that you think both agencies can take credit for?
Oh, I think there are. I think that really that ABAG has really taken a look at, you know, issues that go beyond beyond jurisdictions like earthquake safety, and it's brought management together, different issues. It's taken on different issues and brought communities together on those issues. And I think MTC has brought communities together on the transportation side. I can't there's so many, it's kind of hard to just pick one or two. Well, I think the argument was, or at least the discussion was, if you did the things that everyone talked about, if you did infill development, if you went to higher densities, if you built along transportation corridors, then the natural conclusion was you would then protect those open space areas that needed protecting. In other words, if you built wisely, then you would do those things. It's kind of interesting because many of us who served on ABAG and MTC came with an environmentalist agenda. And I certainly was one, and I know there were many who were there. So I think that while we didn't have the opportunity so much to talk about it, when you're talking about, rebuilding 880 after the earthquake, or you're talking about the Caldecott Tunnel, or you're talking about others, you don't have the opportunity to talk about it. The thought was, if you built wisely and with good practices, then you could also incorporate into that protection of open space.
And explain to me how transportation and land use are so closely related.
That's a really good question, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain how they're related. If you think about it, let me go back to early days. If you think about how the country was first built, how we developed, we built our communities along what would be a streetcar line. We would now say, a light rail line. So communities were located kind of centrally, and then they built along lines where there was transportation available. Then you take a look at what we did in the 1980s, where we had these suburbs that grew outside because there were cars now available. So now you have these suburbs growing and people now driving into the center city where the work was. So now you have the congestion that you've never had before. So now you're dealing with how do you build so that you can promote some sort of public transit, reduce congestion, and get people to and from work. So if you look at it in those terms, you can see that that's how land use and transportation are connected, because it's where you live, where you work, and how you get to and from that.
So where do you think regionalism is headed in the Bay Area in the future?
Well, we're celebrating, MTC's 40th anniversary, and we haven't seen it change too terribly much in 40 years. So I would suspect it's not going to change a whole lot. But I think its best chance of getting even better is if the local agencies, through their own enlightened self-interest, see that there's some benefit to having this regional body as a way of making decisions about issues across jurisdictional boundaries. So I think if anything in the future, it will not be top down, but it'll be bottom up, more bottom up. Well, I think as we continue to see, issues of, the economy being one, and you see, communities not being able quite being able to develop the way they wanted to, or change in their development patterns, seeing changes in transportation patterns, seeing new things coming in to the coming into the Bay Area might bring people together. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting that even locally in Santa Clara County, there are a couple of issues that have brought 3 or 4 cities together to talk about those issues right now and trying to get joint agreements on some of those issues. So I think that's the type of thing by what I mean, you know, locally it starts here and then it might move up to a larger agency.
So what do you think are some of the accomplishments of MTC that they should be most proud of in its 40-year history?
Well, you know, I think the fact that they have, you know, just really done a remarkable job. It's kind of hard to pick, you know, just one thing because when you're going through it, but during my time, some of the things I saw, you know, was, you know, BART to the airport, our JPB, the expansion of, you know, 880, 680, you know, 101 and 85 in the Bay Area. But I also have to say, I'm going to put a caveat here, a lot of that happened because a lot of the counties became self-help counties where they passed their own sales tax measure. So in effect, they really helped generate a lot of that. But, you know, just looking, I mean, even the safe call boxes that MTC did, their programming, bringing program members together to discuss issues. I just think all of it has been a good step forward.
And then what about on the ABAG side? What, if you look at its 50-year history, are there some standout accomplishments in your mind?
Well, I think the thing basically is the housing issue, getting communities to recognize that they have a responsibility for housing. I think their earthquake safety has been a remarkable program for communities. I think they've done work with hazardous waste too. I think a lot of those things that communities maybe don't think of right off the top of their head, but usually I think those things. But I think when I think of ABAG, I think of their housing. I just have to tell you one little story, and I was thinking about it when I was recently on the Sunnyvale Planning Commission, and Sunnyvale had before I was on the commission, had allocated about 23 million square feet of office space. And the commissioners were complaining about ABAG's housing requirements, saying, oh, there's no way we could ever build such and such a housing. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. You have a council and a planning commission that approved 23 million square feet of office space, and you're complaining about 4,000 housing units? Come on, there's got to be a balance. And I think that realization, I think ABAG has done a tremendous job of making people realize that they have to have a responsibility for housing when they're encouraging so many jobs in the area. The thing that comes to mind is that I just saw that there's money now available through the Obama's administration, the Recovery Act. I saw that there's money available for Doyle Drive, and I said, I mean, I don't live in San Francisco, and I thought, oh, finally, Doyle Drive is going to get done. I mean, I've been hearing San Francisco talk about Doyle Drive for such a long time, and the Trans-Bay Terminal in San Francisco are two big things. And as I said, I don't live there, but I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we've been talking about those forever. I remember as a member of the JPB talking about the Trans-Bay Terminal, and that had to be probably 1994. And here we are, you know, so many years later, and now it looks like that's a reality. You know, and the Caldecott Tunnel is another one that I hear about. But as I'm driving and I see the HOV lanes and those kinds of things that occurred, you know, I have some pride in that. But you know, it's also interesting because when I left MTC, and you're talking about open space, I was a board member of the Peninsula Open Space Trust, which really had a campaign to save the San Mateo coast. And you know, it was kind of it did bring together the whole issue of housing, transportation, and open space protection. There's so many things that go together, and even though those two agencies don't talk about it, I think that if they do the job right, then you have an avenue to protect your open space.
Now they've formed a joint powers committee, and they're making decisions among the four of them, and they're calling it One Bay Area now. That's very interesting.
Well, we started that, when I was there, that was started. And it was started to develop, I hope my recollection is correct, it was started to develop to see if there wasn't a way that we could link our land use, transportation, air quality decisions, because we were trying to be an attainment area for air quality. So we're trying to bring all of those issues together to see if that when we made those decisions, all of those decisions would not worsen air quality, would protect the environment and all of those. But obviously it's gotten a lot further in the process, and I love the name One Bay Area. Just it conveys what they wanted to, that we're all in this together.